Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Connecting Dots podcast. I'm your host, Osama, and our today's guest is Sharyar, who has joined us from Alberta. He has been a professional photographer and has successfully transitioned to now being a senior machine learning engineer. So, with that, let's get started. How are you doing today?
Thank you for having me on the podcast, Osama. I'm doing really well. I hope your Saturday is going equally well.
So far, so good. Thank you very much. So I'll start off by asking you about your current role as a senior machine learning engineer. What does the title entail?
Absolutely. So I currently work at AltaML, which is a machine learning company based out of Calgary, and they have offices all over Canada now,
Mm-hmm.
including Edmonton and Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I
Mm-hmm.
specifically work within a subdivision of the company called the Applied AI Lab, where I'm a team lead. And what
Mm-hmm.
we do is every 4 months we get new associates, so they're kind of like interns that are
Mm-hmm.
starting their journeys in the field of ML, but they do have some
Mm-hmm.
experience or they have some education with ML and programming. My job
Mm-hmm.
is to get them onboarded, teach them more
Mm-hmm.
advanced skills within machine learning, and then get them to work on specific use cases that will benefit our partners. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we have partners, including Spartan Controls, Suncor, and a couple of other companies who we
Mm-hmm.
work with for this program. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, they give us different ideas on what we can work on, and they give us data, and then we try to build a machine learning focused solution for them that can help do all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
and it involves quite a few different wearing a few different hats, including mentoring, interviewing candidates, writing code,
Mm-hmm.
reviewing code that the candidates or the associates have written. But
Mm-hmm.
hopefully that helps answer some of your questions.
Yeah. No, that's pretty cool. So tell me a little bit about how did you develop an interest in this position since you worked in a very different field before that?
Mhm. So it goes back to my transition, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But I actually was one of the associates who started at Altimel last year.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved to
Mm-hmm.
Calgary originally in July because of this internship. And then
Mm-hmm.
right around the time I was ending my internship with them, an opportunity came up where a role became available. And I asked my
Mm-hmm.
team lead, I was like, hey, do you think I
Mm-hmm.
might be a good fit here? And they did a small
Yeah.
interview and they hired me on. They liked what they saw in me. So that's how I ended
Yeah.
up in this position.
Right. Excellent.
Mhm.
So now that it's been quite a while that you've been working in the tech sector so far, so what myths do you think have been busted for you?
Mhm. Um, Couple of myths, I think. One myth was that you need a formal education in this field in order to make it. That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people
Yeah.
with high school diplomas who have
Mm-hmm.
made it as far as software architects. And then I've seen
Mm-hmm.
people who have PhDs and they don't know what they're doing. So
Yeah.
I think that myth of
Mm-hmm.
education is excellence. That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a lot of self learning and get ahead. I went to school for this, and I
Mm-hmm.
realized a lot of the education that I received at the U of A was very theoretical and useful. But
Mm-hmm.
most of the practical stuff was stuff I learned by either doing projects or watching YouTubers or actually doing the work. So that was a big myth that kind of
Mm-hmm.
got bursted into smithereens there.
Yeah.
Another myth I think that I really believe is um, this idea that machine learning is this kind of magic. It's not. It's
Mm-hmm.
mathematics. It's mathematics and statistics
Mm-hmm.
primarily.
Mm-hmm.
Software engineering's the packaging around it that allows people to actually deploy those things. But machine
Mm-hmm.
learning is not magic. It works really well. It feels like magic when you actually do it right, but it's
Yeah.
mostly very sophisticated mathematics and statistics. So it's very cool
Right.
to understand how that works and actually get an insight of how to make it work for what we are trying to do.
Excellent, excellent. So I've been very curious to ask you this, or rather, I should say that I was pretty eager to ask you that since you came from a very different field and then you started your journey. So did you do some sort of projects? Did you do some sort of coursework?
Mhm.
So how did you establish yourself so that
Mhm.
the employers that you were targeting that they could see the value in you?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. And that's something that I try to actually educate my current associates on because once they finish their internships
Mm-hmm.
with our program, they usually go out and
Mm-hmm.
look for full time positions since this is an
Mm-hmm.
internship. And a couple of things that I recommend and that I did as well was
Mm-hmm.
um, if you are looking at a specific job posting, look at the skills they describe. And then if you don't have some of them, go out and acquire them. Like, have a
Mm,
long-term objective in mind. So let's say if you want to work at a company that uses Docker and Kubernetes all the time, those are table
mm,
stakes for you then, because they're common software engineering skills.
yeah.
You should go out and look for ways to include and
Mm,
incorporate them into your current skill set. The
mm,
other aspect that I think most people actually don't realize is you have more
yeah.
skills than you know.
Mm,
Those include soft skills. Hard skills are easy to teach. You can give them a book, you can give them a quick start tutorial, or you can get them
yeah.
working on a project and they'll pick it up. But teaching a person how to work in a team, how to
Mm,
communicate, how to be a leader, those are
mm,
extremely hard to teach. And they are honestly impossible to teach without an
yeah.
extensive amount of time that isn't often available when you're starting out in a new position. So if you've been in
Mm,
roles where you've developed those skills, such as you've worked at McDonald's as an example, that's a very high pressure environment where you often have to juggle multiple priorities. And if
yeah.
you know how to sell it, you
Mm,
can actually do really well with just explaining, hey, I worked at
yeah.
McDonald's. I managed a cash register while dealing with unruly customers. So I knew how to
Yeah.
deal with customers. I have client facing experience.
Yeah.
All of those things can make a difference in how you sell yourself. And I think that was one
Yeah.
of the biggest reasons I became a team lead, was because I
Mm,
had that photography experience where I dealt with so many people that dealing with six
mm.
associates was not a big deal for me.
Right. So now that, well, thankfully you've touched base on it a little bit, but just to comprehensively or formally put it together, how, to what extent do you think your entrepreneurial journey came in handy when you were in this field?
I think I wouldn't have made it this far so quickly without having had
Mm,
done that. I'm an
mm,
introvert at heart, and photography pushed
yeah.
me to become an
Yeah.
extroverted introvert, I guess, is the best way I can
Yeah.
put it. Where while I don't prefer meeting a lot of people at the same time, I can do
Hmm.
it. Before I couldn't.
Yeah.
If you're thrown in the midst of 100 people and you need to direct them for photos, you're just forced to
Yeah.
learn how to talk to that many people very quickly. And that is a
Correct.
very important skill when you're trying to
Mm,
navigate a complex conversation with you're
hmm.
trying to satisfy your stakeholders, such as your clients. You're trying to
Mm,
gather requirements for what they want and what they need. And they might not be too like the exact same thing. They might not even know what they need.
yeah.
So trying
Yeah.
to educate them on what ML is capable of and how it can help their
Mm,
business. If their data is even at a point where it can be helped, because a lot of organizations, the way they collect data isn't necessarily how effective for machine learning. And
yeah.
people think there's this like cure all that's machine learning is. No, it requires very
Yeah.
good data collection practices, and being
Yeah.
able to navigate that comes from my entrepreneurial experience, where I dealt with so
Right.
many difficult clients and difficult conversations
Mm,
and whatnot. So it made a huge difference in my journey.
yeah. Excellent. So how's the work-life balance looking like for you since now that you've become a senior?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'll be honest.
Mm,
I have a lot more meetings than I personally like.
yeah.
I like sitting down and writing code and reviewing code, but that's
Yeah.
also on me because I'm trying to educate people and I'm trying to
Hmm.
teach them different concepts. So oftentimes
Hmm.
when I'm reviewing code with associates because they're not used to the process so much, I have a video call with them where I explain my thought processes around,
Yeah.
hey, you wrote this piece of code. What does it mean? Why do you think it won't
Yeah.
work? What are the long-term consequences of
Yeah.
this? So the work-life
Yeah.
balance for me, I like sitting down and just writing code, but I end up
Yeah.
actually being in a lot more meetings than I personally like.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah.
I usually work
Yeah.
like around 6 to 8 hours a day, plus minus. There are days
Hmm.
when I'm working 10 hours because it got busy, but it's a
Yeah.
pretty stable balance. Like
Yeah.
it's not
Hmm.
horrible, but it also goes back on how well organized you are, how much you have taken on your plate,
Yeah.
and what the organization's culture is. All Time Health's culture
Hmm.
is very, very positive about work life balance. They really reinforce it, and I really
Hmm.
appreciate that.
Well, that's pretty cool. So build or taking it forward.
Mhm.
Do you have any cool traditions at work?
We have a couple actually. So we have the monkey and lion tradition that I really like.
Mm,
So every Friday or every second Friday now, we have an all hands meeting where basically the
mm-hmm.
entire company joins in on a call. And if there are any
Mm-hmm.
team announcements that need to be made, they're usually made around that time. Now we are talking about like
Mm,
150 people on a call, or like in person, whatever. So
mm-hmm.
you during the end of the call, there's like a
Mm-hmm.
lion. nomination
Mm-hmm.
where somebody might nominate you for a lion, which is if you've
Yeah.
done an exceptional job or you've done something exceptional, you might be applauded for it and you'll get the lion nomination. But on the flip side, you can nominate yourself for a monkey, where basically you have done something stupid,
Yeah.
but you know how to
Yeah.
fix it for the future. But then you
Yeah.
share with the rest of your team, hey, I did this stupid thing.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have done it, and this is how I'll prevent it next time.
Yeah.
And the idea is to promote people, or like promote the idea that hey, if you do good, you'll be celebrated. If you do bad, you won't
Yeah.
be criticized. Instead, you are encouraged to make mistakes and learn from them.
Mhm. Excellent.
Mm.
That reminds me of a funny story, or let me rather ask you, have you ever pushed code on a Friday evening
Oh
and
God.
then gotten yelled at on Monday?
Tell me about it, man. How many times? The thing is, I'm the one reviewing code, so I'm like, why? Like, why? I've seen code where
Exactly.
it's like true is equals to true, and I'm like,
Yeah. What
are
is
you
this?
I'm like, what are you doing, man? And it was
Yeah.
on Friday evenings that would happen. So I
That's
actually
one of the
changed.
key learnings in my career.
Yeah,
Never do that.
yeah, I'm like, you know what? Let's change it
Yeah.
around. I've called it Refactor Fridays, where I ask my
Yeah.
associates to actually go back, look at all of the code they've written
Yeah.
over the week, and figure
Yeah.
out how they can do it better. I ask them
Right.
not to develop new features on Friday or
Yeah.
not work on new things.
Yeah.
Instead, go back and fix the way they've
Yeah.
done things. Sometimes it can break
Yeah.
stuff, but the good thing is we are
Mhm.
at that experimental phase. We're not in production
Yeah.
usually, so we're not
Uh-huh.
breaking some major stuff,
Yeah.
but it can lead to
Yeah.
disasters at times, so we fix them usually. Yeah.
Cool, cool. So transitioning the conversation a little bit towards your academics.
Mhm.
So honestly, you've been into microbiology and now you've moved into the tech sector. And photography was one thing, and now it's another
Mhm.
thing that is pretty fascinating to me.
Mhm.
So share some insights about that. That how did that start for you initially, and then how did you plan on transitioning to tech?
Absolutely. So do you guys remember Dexter's
Yeah.
Laboratory, the
Yes,
cartoon from
sir.
Cartoon Network? As
Yeah.
a kid, I was enamored by that cartoon. It
Uh,
was the coolest thing to me. And he had this underground
yeah.
lab, and I loved it.
Yeah.
So I wanted
Yeah.
to become a scientist back then.
Uh-huh.
I was like, okay, how do I become a scientist in Pakistan, since that's where I'm originally from? I was like,
Hmm.
that's not really a hope here. So I moved to U of
Yeah.
A. I went there for microbiology. So University of Alberta, for
Hmm.
those of us who might not know. I went
Yeah.
there and did a microbiology degree. I was like, this is so cool. I'll be able to work with new microbes. I
Yeah.
worked on some very cool projects
Yeah.
during my undergrad, including understanding the interactions between nanoparticles,
Hmm.
bacteria, and the immune system. So it was some
Yeah.
really cool stuff. But when I graduated, it was one of the recessions that was going on. The oil market crash had happened right around 2015, if you guys remember what it was like.
Hmm.
I had a
Hmm.
standing job offer to become an environmental consultant that got rescinded
Hmm.
because the job market froze. So I was supposed to be in
Salty.
Vancouver, but hey, when life gives you
Yeah.
lemons, you make things
Make
better.
a lemonade.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
picked up
Cool.
photography along the way in my undergrad, like last year of
Uh-huh.
undergrad, as like a hobby, just to have fun and whatnot.
Hmm.
But I was like, you know what? What have I got to lose? So I started working on it a little bit more. I worked
Hmm.
an admin position as well, as a volunteer coordinator with a food bank at that time. So I was doing both of those
Hmm.
simultaneously. Along the
Hmm.
way, I finished my contract there. I worked a variety
Hmm.
of different positions, including events coordinator. I've worked as a sales associate. I've worked so many different
Yeah.
jobs. I ended up at Alberta Pension Services, great
Yeah.
organization, but I got really bored of my role there eventually. It was to a point where I was like, I need to be more mentally challenged. Like, I need to
Hmm.
have more stuff going on. What I'm asking the question, how the heck do I fix this? Um, and I applied to the U of A thinking, hey, you know what? There's no way I'll get in, but I'll just
Yeah.
apply. I applied to the U of A for a
Uh-huh.
master's in software engineering. Keep in mind, I have a
Hmm.
bachelor's in science. So
Hmm.
the first response was, oh, heck no, you will not get in. I applied to U of C,
Yeah.
U of T. No university would let me in. Then I went and I took time off work, a couple of hours almost for a couple of days. And I would go up, go to the U of A and show up near the professor's office and just sit outside, camp there and be like, hey, I need to talk to
Yeah.
you. Eventually, one of the professors
Yeah.
spoke to me. He was on the admissions committee, and he was like, he was so annoyed by my persistence. He was like, fine, we'll just give you a chance. How about, he was
Yeah.
like, the problem is you don't have a background, and we are afraid you'll not succeed in the program.
Mm.
However,
Mm.
we'll give you a chance if you're willing to go study the basics in an undergrad like course or something. I was like, I'm on it. So what I
Yeah.
did was, as soon as they gave me that conditional offer, I went
Mm.
back to my boss and I was like, hey, gotta quit. Here's my 2 weeks notice. Peace
Yeah.
out. And then from
Yeah.
December 2019 until the September of 2020 or August of 2020, I
Mm.
actually did the Three Idiots Rancho Das thing where I basically showed up to different classes at the U of A, no admissions, nothing. I'd just show up to the class and I'd sit there and I
Mm.
would actually study. So I went to undergrad computing science classes and I would just show
Mm-hmm.
up and study computing science like that. And that's how I built my
Yeah.
foundations. And I would watch YouTube.
Yeah.
And then I joined the
Yeah.
actual master's program officially
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and started taking courses. That's how I like
Yeah.
it kind of started. I
Man,
think
honestly, kudos to you. That's a legit success story right in front of my eyes.
it
Honestly,
was a
you
very
sound
risky
like a
move.
motivational speaker at this point of time.
It was really scary at
If you're
that time. I don't know how it
persistent.
worked out, man.
Yeah, cool, cool, cool. So considering the phase of life that you're in right now, do you see yourself either getting an MBA or a PhD eventually after?
Honestly, maybe a PhD, definitely not an
Yeah.
MBA.
Uh-huh.
Maybe a PhD. Even that, I'm not certain about. Just as I had said
Okay.
earlier, what I've noticed in this
Mm-hmm.
field is your accreditation. It
Mm-hmm.
might get you through the door, maybe at the beginning,
Yeah.
but it doesn't matter in the long term. Your
Yeah.
ability to write good algorithms, your ability to understand data structures, your ability to
Mm-hmm.
understand machine learning algorithms, that's what matters. And a PhD can
Gotcha.
certainly help you specialize. If you want to work at Google DeepMind and develop new algorithms, that's the way to go, definitely. But that's not what I want to do. I want to be a software engineer at the end of the day, or
Mm-hmm.
an ML engineer with more of a twist for software in my life. So that makes more sense. MBA, definitely not, because it's very management focused. And as I said, I'm an
Mm-hmm.
introvert. I don't like people. I instead like code. I like writing code. I like dealing with
Yeah.
code mostly.
Gotcha. Pretty cool. So other than that, although you did touch base on it a little bit, but let's formally get into it.
Mhm,
I'm very excited to know about how did Box Cube photography start? Because if you go to the website, it's a legit business, and it's not just taking photos is one aspect of it, but there are 100 different avenues that, as a founder or as a leader of your company, you need to take care of it.
mhm.
So walk us through a little bit about how the venture started and how's it going so far.
Absolutely. So it started back in 2014, as I said, in my last year of undergrad. I'd picked up a
Hmm.
Nikon D90, I remember at that time. And I was
Yeah.
piss poor because I was a student, pardon my French, sorry. And I wanted to buy a lens and I couldn't
Hmm.
afford it at that time. So I was like, how do I afford a lens? Put an ad on Kijiji
Yeah.
saying photographer for hire and put some of my
Hmm.
pictures up. And there was this lady,
Hmm.
I don't know what got into her, and she was like, hey, do you want to come photograph my wedding? I was like, oh, heck no. That's so
Hmm.
much responsibility. And I told her outright, I was like,
Hmm.
I don't have a lot of experience. Are you okay with that? She was like, yeah, I've been married for 10 years. Come out to my ranch, take some photos. It's just a get together. And I go out there.
Yeah.
And one of my good friends was with me, Ahmed Hayat, at that time, I remember.
Hmm.
And it was our first official photography gig. And we took some
Hmm.
photos at the wedding, and it was a lot of fun. I was still working in a
Hmm.
lab, and I got back, and a couple of days later, after I delivered the digital photos to the lady, she sent me
Hmm.
one of the photos printed with like a thank you note at the back. And I was like, this is so much more rewarding than anything
Yeah.
I've done in the lab. Like, this was so nice. So I started
Hmm.
working on it really hard at that time. I was like, what's there to
Hmm.
lose? What's the worst that will happen? I'd named it Box Cube because it's a ridiculous name and I thought it would fail. So I was like,
Yeah.
whatever. I'll just call it something silly. And I called it Box
Yeah.
Cube because why not?
Yeah.
But it grew to a point where I had like I think 25 or 30 weddings in a year and like 40
Hmm.
shoots other than weddings. I was busy to the point where I was working 10 hours a day. um, but then I automated a lot of my business by using like different CRM and tools, and then I went back to the workforce because I was starting to get bored of photography. I was like, this needs to be
Yeah.
like a balance.
Hmm.
So I went back to work. I was like, okay, I'll work in this admin position while my business is still going. And I found eventually I got it down to a science. Like photography for me became a science, where I knew how to pose people, what kind of lighting am I looking at. I understood the inverse square law that applies to like light as it falls off, and how do you make it work when you have different flashes and things like that.
Hmm.
And eventually, like it lost the charm that I had for it. And that was
Yeah.
honestly because I was doing too much of it. So I actually scaled it back
Yeah.
now. I only take maybe 10 to 12 weddings a year. And I try to preserve my weekends as much as possible. I don't do a lot of shoots outside the clients that I really want to work with. And with my current job, it is very demanding. It's very mentally like demanding. So I like taking time off. So it's still there. It's
Hmm.
still a really large part of my success, especially when it came to being able to afford my master's degree. I wouldn't have been able to do it had I not had my master's, had I not had my photography business. So it played a huge role there,
Gotcha.
but it's
Hmm.
still going on, still going strong. But I've scaled it back to make it a
Yeah.
little more manageable for myself.
Uh-huh. Well, that's excellent, man, and I honestly wish you all the best for it. And
Thank
I
you.
hope that that even flourishes further. Even though that you might have switched fields, but I still have the best wishes for it.
Thank you.
So coming back to the software track a little bit, I wanted to ask you, how do you continue to stay up to date with the relevant trends in the industry?
Great question. So what I tried to do is there's like, of course, YouTube, and you can watch a ton of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. There's a couple of channels that I really like because of the core principles they teach. But I
Mm-hmm.
often go back to what matters. What matters is good software design. And what
Mm-hmm.
matters to me is at the end delivering a product that people use, not something that you're creating for creation's sake. That's fun, but that's not meant to be like the
Mm-hmm.
end product, right? So oftentimes, let's say I'm working on a new project which demands a new kind of algorithm and I've never seen it. I'll go looking for it at that point. I don't actively like monitor like machine learning research, because I don't know if you've noticed this trend, but there's like they're producing thousands of
Mm-hmm.
papers a day, and
Yeah.
each paper is just incrementally different than the other paper because everybody wants to
Mm.
put their foot into the field, and they're like, hey, this
Yeah.
is my footprint. But it's just like, oh, we got a 0.4% increase in cipher data set in terms of our recognition algorithm. And I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
care. I won't use it. The client is happy with
Yeah.
90%. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. For me, the
Mm-hmm.
more interesting principles are like the cool algorithms that were developed back in the day, like Kruskal's algorithm, Prim's algorithm. How do you
Mm-hmm.
go about looking at different graph algorithms? How does it actually work in real life? And
Mm-hmm.
larger implementations. Machine learning is very computing heavy, and you can
Mm-hmm.
absolutely use like tremendous amounts of compute power. But when you actually go and deploy it, you will not be able to run it when millions of people are trying to use your system. Like it'll crash because you were relying on very large computing systems originally. So I'm
Right.
like, how do I go back? What do I focus on? So I focus on a couple of YouTubers that I really like. One of them is Engineering with Utsav, because he teaches some really good core principles and design principles really well. There's a couple of others that I sometimes follow. There's like another YouTube channel that gives summaries of recent and most influential machine learning papers. And I can look for it if you want, but that's a really good YouTube
Mm-hmm.
channel to follow. And then I'll read papers when I can, or if they're relevant
Yeah.
to what I'm trying to do.
Well, if I were to build upon it, even when I started in my architect position and I was preparing for interviews, I think you I shouldn't say that it's an underrated market right now, because I mean it has gained a great amount of recognition all over. That there are a lot of engineers or people who are putting in effort other than their day job, and they are actually creating cool content.
Hmm.
And instead of reading stuff or going into too much technical stuff, they rather present it in a way that it serially connects piece by piece and then eventually becomes a big thing. And by the end of the tutorial, let's say, you're like, man, that was pretty easy. Or
Hmm.
it and in that regard, I would rather give a shout out to them that it is hard work.
It
It
is a
needs
lot of
adequate
hard work.
amount of
Yes.
planning and consistency, most
Hmm.
importantly.
Hmm.
That's pretty nice. So, other than that, I would want to ask you, not just as a software engineer, but Sharyar Memon as a person, what is success to you, and what might be the core values that you live by in your professional life?
Hmm. Thank you. That's a really good question, and honestly, a really hard one. I think success is defined in different
Mhm.
metrics in different phases of life. I'm getting into a phase in my life where I'm getting married to someone I really love. And for me, success will look like having, of course, financial stability, but then seeing that person happy and grow as an individual along with me.
Mhm.
That to me will be success. I will have my family here. Seeing them happy and healthy will be success for me. Professionally, success to me looks like a well crafted product that completes objectives that were defined out early in the project, for example. I find like scope creep is something that often happens with software engineering projects. So I'm very hard on my clients where we try to define requirements early on and we try to achieve them first and then start adding things on and tacking things on to make sure that at the end of the day, when that product, or at least when it reaches a milestone, I can say, hey, we delivered on all those things that we set out to do originally. Not this Neanderthal that the project turns into because they kept tacking on requirements and suddenly you can't
Mhm.
achieve them because some of the requirements don't aren't compatible with each other and you're like, oh, I failed
Yeah.
at this project, and I'm like, that sucks. That's not professional success, and it makes me
Mhm.
slightly agitated because it has happened, and I'm like, how do I
Mhm.
make sure that doesn't happen? I think
Mhm.
those are the two places in life right now. One of my core
Yeah.
values beyond success, I think uh, I read this quote in the book called Atomic Habits. It said, you don't rise to the level of your ambitions, you fall to the level of your systems. And
Mhm.
success and defining goals, it's great and all. But for me, defining values and following along with them, and then having a system to follow along, that's more success for me than like a specific goal per se. And
Yeah.
one of those values for me is learning. So I spend a lot of time reading and studying new things. Right now,
Mhm.
I'm studying Scala because it's something interesting. I was studying Rust for a little while because it was a
Mhm.
different paradigm than Python. That's what I normally use. Um,
Mhm.
I hope that answers your question. Sorry, I went off on a tangent.
No, no, that's pretty cool, and the fact that you're just another person who referred to this book of Atomic Habits, actually. So once I was doing some sort of googling, and then I came across this theory where they say that if you're doing a little bit bad every day, and you accommodate or you compensate for it after the year end, you will see that you don't really decline or degrade that much. Whereas if you were to do a little bit of an incremental good every single day, and then if you were to compound it over the entire year,
Mhm.
you see that you're 37% ahead of where you started.
Yep.
And when I looked at the visual representation, I looked at the graph, honestly, man, it just blew me away. And since then, and it was like starting this year that I realized that, and then I was like, okay, one thing that I'm going to do for sure, it doesn't matter how much I do, all I'm going to do is that I'm going to be consistent.
Mhm.
If I'm thinking about something, no matter how much I do it, I'm going to do it
Mhm.
piece by piece every day.
Mhm.
And then maybe by the year end, we'll see how it goes. But
Yeah.
so far, I can see the result of this theory, and it's
Mhm.
it's pretty cool. I just, that's one of my things that maybe I would have known about this earlier. But again, better late than never, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Cool. So now that we are heading towards the closing of our conversation, so I would want to ask you about what things excite you in general in life.
Um, That's a good question. Recently, I was reading the series of books called Algorithms Illuminated. It's by this
Mm-hmm.
wonderful author. I think he teaches at Stanford or another really luminous university, but he
Mm-hmm.
teaches really well. And he was talking about one of the algorithms. It was the knapsack problem, a common problem we see in software engineering. It often shows up
Mm-hmm.
on lead code challenges, by the way. And It's a dynamic programming problem, and I was just
Mm-hmm.
trying to understand like how he goes about solving it and what his explanations are. And when it made sense, it clicked. I was like, oh, that was so cool. And it was very exciting just to be able
Yeah.
to actually put that together in code, see it work, and then actually realize how it works. And I
Mm-hmm.
want to get to a level one day where I can write algorithms like this and make
Mm-hmm.
like a mark on the industry and say, hey, this is Sharyar's algorithm one day. And
Yeah.
like that would be
Yeah.
incredible. And that requires me to understand all the work we have that has been done. As they
Yeah.
say, you stand on the shoulder of giants. So
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty exciting to me. The other stuff that
Mm-hmm.
really excites me is cooking. I like cooking a lot, Pakistani
Oh,
food
wow.
specifically. And then since I
Nice.
live in Calgary, close to the
Yeah.
mountains, of course, hiking to the mountains, finding waterfalls, taking a dip in them when I can. That's
Hmm.
always pretty cool as well.
Nice.
And a
Well,
weird
actually,
generic.
Muhammad was the guy who inspired me to learn to cook, because for the first time
Ah,
I saw a guy who could cook, and not just cook,
but
cook so well.
I remember.
So I'm like, that's pretty
I still
nice.
remember the nihari he made,
Yeah,
right
man.
at the housing that we used to be at, near the
Yeah.
U of A.
Yeah, yeah, pretty cool.
Mm.
Anyways, if given a superpower, what kind of problem or slash challenge you were to be likely to be solving?
Um, this is a hard one, but I wish I could give empathy to people. I find
Hmm.
like people forget what it's like to be in the role of the other person, or even to think about what it's like to
Hmm.
be in the other person's shoes. And I feel, I mean, I don't have any substantive evidence for this, but I feel if we were more empathetic towards each
Yeah.
other, a lot of the world's problems would go away. Um,
Hmm.
so I wish I had the power to give empathy to people
Uh-huh.
and have more of it myself as well.
Yeah.
I think that would actually be very helpful.
Excellent. So I'll close off with this last question. Knowing what you know now, what do you think you would have done differently in your professional life?
In my professional life, I think one of my good friends, Faraz, he had suggested I switch to engineering a long time ago, right when I was in my undergrad. One of the biggest reasons I didn't go into engineering back in the day was because my dad was an engineer. I was like, I won't copy my dad. I'll do something different. So biology. I wish I had not been
Hmm.
stupid like that. Don't
Yeah.
go against your dad's wisdom just because you don't want to follow dad's wisdom. There's a lot to it. Follow dad's wisdom.
Correct.
I wish I'd
Yeah.
followed it. I would actually
Hmm.
be much further ahead in my journey potentially. But who knows? Um,
Exactly.
I think
It's
I.
always that we connect the dots backwards only, right?
Mhm.
And we don't know what
Hindsight's
lies ahead.
2020.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool, cool. Well, thank you so much for being here with us, Sharyar. I honestly had a great time talking to you, and maybe someday we'll actually, reconnect over coffee or something. If I were to be in Calgary someday,
Please come
for
by. I would
sure,
love that. I'd love to host you guys.
for sure. Thank you so much. And with that, I'd like to close off the conversation. Thank you so much once again for being here with us. This podcast is going to be hosted on all major platforms. And if you like the content, please feel free to share it with your friends and family. And most importantly, provide us with your feedback. Show your support by buying me a coffee, and I'll provide the link in the description. So until the next episode, take care and stay tuned. Bye.